Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
What was the point where you were kind of realizing, oh, this is actually really bad for me? Like, was it during interrogation when you were arrested? Was it in court? Was it, or maybe did you still have hope kind of throughout that whole thing? Like, where was that, like, oh my God moment for you?
I was fully expecting to be found not guilty because up until that point in time, I thought that only guilty people were convicted. It really wasn't a polygraph at all. That this was just an interrogation masked as a polygraph.
Your own defense attorney was also not good at all, right?
At the end, it was 11-1 for a conviction. There was one holdout juror that thought that I was innocent, and he said that they were all pressuring him. I had long since lost touch with anybody, and I really couldn't relate or talk to anybody else. I was just sitting there, unable to communicate, unable to relate, feeling out of place.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the Jeffrey Deskovic wrongful conviction episode. As we mentioned in the previous episode, we're going to be interviewing Jeffrey Deskovic in this part, and we're very, very excited. So we have a chat coming up with Jeffrey, and we just talk about his case, all of the police misconduct, even more than we discussed in our telling of the case, and also what it was like for him in prison for the 16 years that he was incarcerated, and his adjustment to his new life after his release. So without further ado, let's get into our interview with Jeffrey Deskovic. So we are here with Jeffrey Deskovic. So Jeff, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show and talking to us and chatting with us about your story. So in the previous episode, we kind of went over a little bit about your case and talked about, the police misconduct involved and things with your wrongful conviction and your release and everything. So our listeners are a little familiar with your case, but the three of us just kind of came up with some questions, things that we were just most interested in learning more about, maybe filling in some gaps that we didn't get in our research of the case. So I guess we'll just start right at the beginning of it all. So I know one of the major things the police said initially that made them kind of focus on you was your reaction to the news of Angela's death. You were very emotional at the funeral and everything. So can you just talk a little bit about how you knew Angela?
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So Angela was a classmate in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine, and that was really it. We were not even really on a hi-bye basis. I was a sensitive teenager, and this was really my first brush with death, so I did have an emotional reaction. But at the same time, so did almost everybody else in the city of Peekskill, to the point that free mental health services were offered for anybody that wanted it.
Yeah, and we had talked a lot in past episodes about how people always scrutinize people's reactions to things. Like if you're too emotional, then it's bad. If you're not emotional enough, it's also bad. So I feel like it's very subjective to look at someone and see how they're dealing with grief and like use that as a way to, say that they're guilty of something just based on one subjective sort of reaction to a thing, because everyone does react differently to things like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, everyone does react differently. Sure.
Yeah. So another thing too is so the police kind of, over the next couple of months, they were kind of befriending you, and they were just pitching it as if you were helping them with this investigation, correct? And you were kind of, doing this semi-police work with them, but they were kind of using that as a way to manipulate you throughout the whole process, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which all of my interactions with them took on the dynamic that they would start out talking to me like I was a suspect, and then when they would push too hard and I'd become frightened and I'd want to get away from them, then they would switch it up. And Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was articulated by them. They would say things
Mm-hmm.
like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinions were correct. And that
Mm-hmm.
tactic was really effective on me because prior to being a teenager, I fantasized about being a cop when I grew up. So that, along with my age, 16, was how that tactic worked out. I would say that another dynamic to everything was that I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect, and that intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique where one officer was pretending to be my friend. So I began to look up to him as a father figure.
So they like, took you around to the crime scene and stuff, correct? And they were showing you different parts of the crime scene and stuff. And then did they kind of use that later on and say like, well, this information you shouldn't have known unless you had some knowledge of the crime? But in fact, they were kind of feeding you the information the whole time, correct?
That's all exactly correct.
Can you talk a little bit about like the interrogation with the police, like especially specifically during like the polygraph test and stuff, like where the police, you said in other interviews, the person doing the polygraph was like getting into your personal space. He was yelling at you a lot. Can you talk about what it was like being in that interrogation room in those moments?
Yeah, sure. So they got me to agree to take the polygraph in the first place by telling me that they had some new information in the file and they wanted to share that with me, and that would allow me to be more helpful to them. But I would first have to take and pass the polygraph. So the next day, which was a school day, rather than go to the high school, I went to the police station for the polygraph. Because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother thought I was in school, so they didn't call around looking for me. They drove me from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, the suburbs, ethnically diverse, middle class uh, city. They drove me by car 40 minutes away to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County. So I had no way of leaving anymore. I was totally dependent upon the police. There were 3 cops that came with me from Peekskill, but they had me ride specifically in the car with the officer who had been pretending to be my friend. And the other 2 cops in a different car. So the ruse continued. The polygraphist himself was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. He was dressed like a civilian, and he never identified himself as a police officer. He never read me my rights. I didn't have an attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat the whole time I was there. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I figured, well, I'm there to help the police, so what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. And from there, they put me in a small room, and the polygraphist gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. Then he wired me up to the polygraph, and then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So, as you point out, he did invade my personal space. He did raise his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And as each hour passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. I mean, remember, I'm 16 years old. I'm not used to talking to adult males, much less one who's carrying on like he is. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." That really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he'd been holding them off, but that he couldn't do so indefinitely, that I had to help myself. Then he added that if I did as they wanted, that they'd stop what they're doing, that I could go home afterwards, that I was not going to be arrested. Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was, that nobody else knew where I was either, loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically in there. And then there was also the push-pull dynamic. The possibility of harm, and then this false life preserver. So I made up a story based on the information which they had given me in the course of the interrogation that day and in the 6 weeks run up to it. By the time everything was said and done, I collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. And obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with murder and rape.
I can't imagine being treated like that now as an adult, so I can't even imagine how it would have felt as a teenager. So I'm wondering, like, is that considered police misconduct? Like, was it misconduct back then? Are there better rules about that now? Do you know anything about kind of like police treatment rules? Have they improved?
So the threat and false promise was illegal, but everything else was not. And by the way, but they got away with the threat and false promise because the interrogation was not videotaped or audio taped. There was no signed confession. And as you might imagine, when they came to court to testify about the confession, they naturally left the illegal actions out of their testimony, left that out of the story. In general, I would say across the board, I would say that the police interrogation tactics are not really better as a whole. There are some states that now mandate that interrogations be videotaped, but that's not all of the states. And some of them, New York, for example, which is where I'm from and still live now, while it is the law that they have to videotape interrogations, they have exceptions for sex offenses. They have exceptions for drug cases. There's exceptions for certain types of homicide. So these exceptions kind of make Swiss cheese out of the general rule. There recently were a few states that barred police from using deceptive tactics when from lying to suspects because that's determined to be coercive. But that's only 4 states. That's not the rest of the country, and there's been no improvement worldwide so far as I know.
I just can't really, like, I was always just wondering, like, can't wrap my mind around why, like, what the motivation is for the police to, like, keep the real perpetrator on the streets, knowing that they're sending the wrong person to jail. Like, I can't understand why they wouldn't just try to get the right person from the beginning.
Like, do you feel that they knew it wasn't you, but they just wanted to get like a quick arrest? Or do you feel like maybe somehow they maybe thought it was you? Like, what are your thoughts on that as well?
I think that they just wanted to solve the case. I mean, I don't look at all of this as a good faith error. I mean, if I think about that as a possibility, the bottom drops out of that argument when you think about things that they did. I mean, it was, they gave me information. They claimed that they claimed I knew details that only a killer would know, as they might say. They engaged in the threat and false promise. The case against me continued once the DNA didn't match me. When it didn't match me, by the way, which was, and the police were told by a prosecutor not to arrest me. They were told, they consulted with a prosecutor, before I was arrested because they wanted to arrest me. And the prosecutor told them that you have no evidence. Do not make an arrest. Wait until you get DNA test results back. So they did not listen to that prosecutor. That was the whole point of why they brought me to this polygraphist. They brought me to him specifically for him to carry out this procedure, which he testified was referred to as GTC, get the confession, as opposed to a different polygraphist that other witnesses, other people in the case were polygraphed by. So that doesn't seem like an accident to me. But then also lying when they came to court about the threat and false promise. But in addition to that, when the DNA didn't match me, the police went back into the field and they interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another. And all of them told the police that she had no boyfriend, that there was no consensual sex. And the police did not document those witness interviews. And they deliberately did not document them, even though they were supposed to. And as a result of them not documenting those interviews, neither my attorneys nor I ever learned about that. We could have used that at the trial. So when I think about all of those things, and then I also think about this polygraphist not having been content with playing a large part in coercing this false confession out of me and then lying about the threat and false promise. Not being content with that, he also falsely attributed a statement to me. He claimed that I said to him, that he heard me say, that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not. Well, first of all, that word was not in my vocabulary as a 16-year-old. And second of all, that statement does not appear in any of their police reports, their early reports about the confession. It only appears in the reports they wrote after the DNA didn't match me. So it's pretty clear that they fabricated that as part of their effort at helping the prosecutor overcome the negative DNA test result. So when I think about all of those things, no, I don't consider that this was a good faith error. In terms of why they do that, I mean, starting with my case and then generalizing out, there was a lot of public pressure on the police to solve the crime. Uh, so that, so for example, there were a number of town hall meetings throughout the city of Peekskill that were held with regards to the case prior to an arrest being made. So updates were given on the progress of the investigation. Safety tips were articulated, shared with the public. They had the state police breathing down their neck. At some point, the victim's family went to the state police and asked them to take over the investigation because they felt that the Peekskill police didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't have very much experience. The state police did not take over the investigation, but they did let the Peekskill police know that they had been contacted. And I think that they just wanted the illusion that they had solved the crime and, made an arrest. I don't know that they were necessarily thinking about the implications of what they were doing, as far as that they're just looking at making an arrest. I don't think they're thinking about, well, I'm leaving a criminal on the loose. I'm leaving a murderer and rapist on the loose, and this person could strike again and victimize someone else. I don't know that was really on the forefront of their mind. And ultimately, that is what happened. It did ultimately cost school teacher Patricia Morrison her life, because the actual perpetrator left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed her 3.5 years later. And it didn't just impact her, but she had 2 children, as I understand, and she was a school teacher also.
Do you know if there was ever any repercussions on the police? Because, I mean, did her family try to do a wrongful death suit? Because if the police had done their job the first time, he wouldn't have been out of jail and their daughter wouldn't have been killed. So was there any kind of repercussions surrounding that?
There were not. So when I was initially released, I interviewed a lot of lawyers in deciding who I was going to utilize to represent me in the course of my seeking compensation. And every time I met with a lawyer, I also brought up the idea, well, what about the second victim's family? Could they bring a lawsuit on a similar line of reasoning of what you're mentioning? And the response that I got back from all the lawyers that I met with, and I think that there were about 5 or 6 different firms, they all said to me that they thought it would be a difficult case, but that it could be possible. But at the end of the day, though, the second victim's family did not want to pursue that. They wanted to leave. They wanted to put everything behind them. I mean, I did meet up with them and I did tell them, what I had been doing, that I had been asking that question on their behalf, while I was making rounds interviewing lawyers, but they told me that they wanted to leave that in the past and not pursue it. And so, that was why that was never pursued. I would have liked it to have been pursued, but, it wasn't up to me at that point. I was only able to make sure the claims that I had were brought. I wasn't able to, if I could have, I would have, believe me.
Yeah.
I mean, as it was, I encouraged them quite a bit to do it, but at the end of the day, they didn't want to, and it was their decision.
Mm.
Was there ever any repercussions, in your case, for the police that, did this misconduct and that because of that you were wrongfully imprisoned? Was there anything that ever came out from that against them? Or was there ever an apology or anything that was I know nothing would make up for it, but did they attempt anything?
I think the short answer is nothing. Nothing happened to them. If I was to put a little color to it, I mean, I sued them, but that them and the municipality that they worked for. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the municipality that paid money for it, not them. They personally didn't have very many assets. And so, by the way, when people I'm sued, they're being sued personally, and that's just style points, hype. It's window dressing in the short term. At the end of the day, you have to drop them the people who violated your rights. You have to drop them as individual defendants and just proceed against the municipality that they worked for. Because if you don't, you run the risk that the jury will they'll have to pay it personally, and that's not going to be worth the paper it's written on. So nothing happened to the police personally as far as financially on the civil side. They did not face any criminal charges. They didn't face any professional repercussions. I mean, two of the cops had retired already. The detective was the lead detective who had pretended to be my friend had retired, and so did his partner. I mean, in fact, his partner even had started a second career as a teacher, teaching crime scene investigation of all things. The lieutenant had become the Peekskill police chief based in part on my case, and even after I emerged, exonerated with his role being clear, as laid out in my lawsuit, which was eventually settled against them. The city of Peekskill continued with him for the police chief for another 6 or 7 years. I did sue the medical examiner because of the fraud he committed. He suffered. He didn't suffer any penalties either. I mean, there was the indirect consequence which is that when I brought the lawsuit against him, he suddenly resigned, but that was kind of an indirect. Again, he didn't pay anything personally. He faced no professional consequences, and he didn't face any criminal charges either. There also was the prosecutor, the trial prosecutor. He suddenly resigned 2 weeks before I came out and ran to Florida. But that was indirect. He didn't face anything direct, and he didn't face any criminal penalties. Nobody apologized to me. The apologies I got were from the judge when I was exonerated, but that was not the judge who presided over the kangaroo court in which I was wrongfully convicted. I got an apology from the district attorney, but that was not the district attorney when the case was brought against me. I got a symbolic apology from the prosecutor in the courtroom that was there when the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. But again, that was not the prosecutor that had wrongfully convicted me. So nobody involved ever, and nobody directly involved ever apologized to me for anything. And you're right that nothing can bring back the 16 years that I lost and all these rites of passage. I mean, I didn't graduate high school, and I didn't finish the high school prom. I didn't finish my education at a more traditional age and be on my way to a career, maybe having a family. The years of 17 to 32, which I spent in prison, these are really your formative years. There's a lot of rites of passage there, which I didn't experience. I mean, for example, when I was released, I had, for the first time, I had to live on my own. I had to get a driver's license. I had to go shopping. I had to write a check. I had to balance a budget. I had never done any of those things before. So the loss was profound. Nonetheless, an apology would have meant quite a bit. It still would mean a lot, but it's not been forthcoming.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that's the very least they could do, right? To just say, apologize for their role and all of that. Going back to the just the polygraph for just a second. Do you know for certain, like, they told you that you failed the polygraph, correct? Right?
I was
do you
told
know
that.
Do you know if you actually did, or if that was just a lie?
Well, I can't. I don't know, and we can't know because this polygraphist conveniently says that he says he lost the polygraph chart, that he gave the chart to the prosecutor, and that he never got it back. But there's one other case where that happened, which is another wrongful conviction case we're working on, the Andrew Krivak case. But other than that, his chart never comes up missing any other time. So there is no way to get another person to evaluate the chart to verify that I failed it. And I will say that the polygraph expert that we had to look over everything during the federal civil rights lawsuit, he did say that there were even conditions just as tested, limited just to test the things testified to by the polygraphist. He said that the polygraph method that he used, the polygraphist used, that the Putnam County Sheriff's investigator used, the Arthur method called for recording of the polygraph because there was such a high correlation between that method of polygraphing and false confessions. And, the police polygrapher, when he claimed that he never missed a day of training and that he read all the literature, but somehow he didn't get the memo that everything was supposed to be recorded because of that. And in addition to that, my polygraph expert said that per the polygraph literature, as unscientific as a polygraph is, there are still certain standards, even within that non-scientific instrument, that he violated. For example, the longest they could see somebody being attached to a polygraph is 3 hours. And here I was 3.5 to 4 hours more than that. So even that was considered to be, like a shocking abuse. And the way that the police polygrapher detailed the way that he scored the test, that was not scored correctly per the, my polygraph expert. So there were a lot of things irregular. And at one point, both the polygraphist and the false confession expert stated that it really wasn't a polygraph at all, that this was just an interrogation masked as a polygraph.
That's
But
crazy.
like everyone else, he got away with it. Like everyone else, he got away with it. The municipality that he worked for had to pay money. He paid nothing personally. He faced no civil consequences. He faced no professional consequences. He faced no criminal consequences. Basically, everybody got away with everything. And honestly, that is something that does bother me quite a bit whenever I do think about it.
So did all of this come out in court, or was it not until you got out of jail that you kind of realized that this is, not acceptable?
Yeah. All the stuff that I'm telling you did not come out during my criminal case. It came out in the course of the discovery process of the civil rights lawsuit. And that's one of the things I've articulated. I mean, just as an advocate and working to help change the discovery rules in New York, which ultimately were changed, based on my work and, the work of a lot of my colleagues in the coalition group, It Could Happen to You, which I'm part of. That was one of the arguments, was that I had more rights, discovery rights, as a plaintiff bringing a civil suit than what I did when I was a defendant defending myself against these charges. And so that was one of the arguments that I utilized, and I think that was effective. But having all of that information on the table during the trial, I mean, would that any one of those items could have made the difference? I could have been found not guilty. I didn't have to be wrongfully convicted and spend 16 years in prison. Just like I never knew previously that this medical examiner had been complained of in neighboring counties by authorities for giving untruthful testimony. I never knew that. That would have been wonderful information to use in challenging his credibility, but they never turned any of that over to us.
Yeah, because wasn't it was like the prosecutor had asked the medical examiner to lie, right? During the trial?
Yeah. He told the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, and that's why the day after the DNA test results were officially received by the prosecutor, which showed that semen in the victim didn't match me, a day after that, this medical examiner testified that one day after that he got a phone call, that he can't recall who specifically it was, but he said he got a phone call telling him that the DNA didn't match me and that he had to come up with a new theory by which the case against me could continue in light of that DNA test, with a conviction still being possible. I mean, he admitted in a deposition. So my lawyer went there with our medical examiner to the lab where he was with his lawyer, and he was supposed to, the medical examiner was supposed to show our expert on a microscope the slide that where he claimed what he saw in order to justify saying that she was promiscuous. And when he was supposed to show our expert, that's when he said that what he claimed existed on this slide did not exist. That he claimed he saw didn't exist.
And I've heard you also say in other interviews as well that your own defense attorney was also not good at all, right? So even these
Correct.
things, like so not only was the prosecution obviously doing some pretty shady stuff, like your own defense was not up to the task to actually.
Exactly. And let me put a little color to that. So first of all, he literally asked no questions of this medical examiner. I mean, he stood up in open court and said to him, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you." He never, which is like insane in and of itself, he never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession. He never called my alibi as a witness. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. He rarely met with me. When he would meet with me and I tried to tell him I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He should have never represented me in the first place because of a conflict of interest. So this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another person in that same public defender's office, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. It prevented the defense from asking him for a DNA sample in order to explode the whole consensual sex theory.
Wow. And so did your defense attorney just not, like you said, he said that he didn't care if you were innocent or guilty. So did he maybe think you did it and just didn't care? Like, I can't understand why he wouldn't at least try.
At some point he might have started off that way, but later on, when the DNA didn't match me, he said to me himself that I confessed to a crime that didn't happen. So at least at that point, I know it was clear to him that I was innocent. But I really don't have an explanation for why he didn't do any of the things that I just mentioned to you. I mean, that would all appear to be, kind of like basic 101 level tactics. I mean, similarly, he refused to put on a defense. I wanted to take the stand, and he was supposed to call witnesses and attack the confession. And in reality, when you're defending a case where there's a false confession, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain it. You have to disprove it. You have to then bring it all together in your closing argument. But he didn't do any of that. He would not allow me to testify. He didn't call the alibi as a witness. And in terms of how he addressed it in his closing arguments, at times he argued to the jury that the confession never happened. At other times he argued that it did happen, but that it was coerced. And at still other times he argued that it happened, but it was false. It's, you're not lawyers as far as I know, any of the three of you, but doesn't that just sound like he's just throwing mud against the wall and hoping something fits? I mean, What kind of credibility? If you are a jury on a case and somebody did that, an attorney did that, I mean, are they going to be having any credibility left? Are you going to just, it's natural. You're going to, this guy is willing to say anything. Basically, I think he thinks, so when he, doing all of those things, I mean, what kind of a chance did I have? I mean, it's no wonder I was wrongfully convicted.
Yeah, that's kind of unbelievable to hear. I mean, back then as a 17-year-old, like what was the point? I mean, the point where you were kind of realizing, oh, this is actually really bad for me. Like, was it during interrogation when you were arrested? Was it in court? Was it, or maybe did you still have hope kind of throughout that whole thing? Like, where was that like, oh my God moment for you?
Well, the oh my God moment was after I was arrested, but at some point after that, just from many conversations with my mother and with other members of the family, I mean, they all still believed in the justice system. So they were, always trying to boost my morale and always expressing, confidence that I was going to be, that the system is going to work, that I was going to be found not guilty. So at some point, after hearing that often enough, I bought into it and I adopted that viewpoint as my own. And so I never really realized, really, up until when I was actually found guilty. I mean, I was fully expecting to be found not guilty because up until that point in time, I thought that only guilty people were convicted. So I never really realized that things were going, once I adopted that belief from that point forward, I didn't realize that things were going badly for me. I mean, I had very limited understanding as to what was going on in the courtroom. And I was a 17-year-old and I had never been arrested before and I never had, gone to trial before. And he certainly wasn't explaining very much to me. And he found a way to use the attorney-client privilege against me. I mean, he would not allow my mother or any other member of my extended family to participate in any of the discussions pertaining to him explaining the trial or explaining strategic decisions that I had to make, such as whether to testify or not, or whether I wanted to have a jury trial or did I want to have a trial where a judge made the decision. He would not allow anybody else to participate in the conversation, because as he put it, well, you're the client, nobody else is. But he didn't have to take such a strict interpretation. I mean, I'm 17 years old. My capacity for understanding is limited. I certainly could have used input from adults. I mean, not that they were legal beagles either, in any sense of the word, but still, they were adults. There was mature judgment there.
Yeah, it's crazy because yeah, like you said, the three of us aren't lawyers, but like even I feel like someone who's not a lawyer knows like very basic things that they should have done during the trial. Like those are just things that I feel anyone would know is like you have to do that just weren't done by your attorney or were done very very poorly by the prosecutor and like shady. But do you remember, was the jury decision, was it a quick decision for them to come to that
It was not.
verdict?
No,
Or?
no, no. It was not. They deliberated for 3 days. So here's the thing with that is that another thing that I've learned since I've been exonerated, but did not know at the time, was that at the end it was it was 11-1 for a conviction. There was one holdout juror that thought that I was innocent, and he said that they were all pressuring him. And then they sent a note out. The jury sent out a note asking the judge the question of if they did not reach a verdict, would they be kept sequestered, over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes. And so when I went back to the jury room, the pressure increased based on that. And none of them wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday, and neither did he. And so that was why he switched his vote.
Oh my God.
All for like so we could have a Christmas holiday, I guess. That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it is.
Yeah, so you were was convicted in 91, correct? That was when you
Well, I was convicted in late 1990. I was sentenced in 1991 in January.
1991. Yeah.
You're right. The significant event in the case happened in 1991. Yes.
91. Okay, yeah. So can you just talk to us just a little bit about like so you're like 17 years old, you're in prison for this crime you didn't do. Can you just tell us a little bit about what your experience was like in prison, like at that young age of 17? Like, can you just tell us a little bit
Sure.
about that?
Yeah, sure. I want to quickly mention just at the sentencing, that I had been charged as an adult and tried as an adult, and I was, therefore sentenced as an adult. I was given a 15 to life sentence, which is an adult sentence. Whereas if I was not charged as an adult, then the sentence would have been 9 to life. And the judge sentenced me uh, at the same time, because I begged him to overturn the verdict, I referenced the DNA, and he told me on the record, he said, maybe you are innocent, and he sentenced me anyway. So I wanted to point that out. I mean, that's like bizarre in and of itself. And it's clear to me how he would have had it out because the DNA didn't match me.
Yeah. Well, isn't supposed to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So
Yeah.
clearly the judge had doubt. So that's crazy.
So in terms of, but getting to the prison question, which is what you really asked me. So as a 17-year-old going into a maximum security prison, it was frightening. I mean, the walls were large. The barbed wire was, intimidating, and I'm 17 years old, and I'm in a maximum security prison with fully formed adults, many of whom are guilty of having committed serious violent crimes. And, the guards are abusive verbally, and it was kind of like a strange world. And I always had the fear in the back of my head that people would discover what I was incarcerated for, which was a rape along with a murder. There's a vigilante mentality towards people convicted of sex offenses. There was a lot of violence there. There were 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There was plenty of violence that did not involve weapons. There was gang activity, so there was a general atmosphere of violence. They had a system of maintaining order in a prison known as keep lock, which involved sanctions being imposed on the prisoners if they were found guilty of breaking a prison rule. They would keep you in the cell 23 hours a day out of the 24. They would send less food. Sometimes it would be 3 or 4 days old. They would give you 1 hour in a small caged area with maybe a pull-up bar in it if you were lucky. You could shower 2 days 1 week and 3 the next rather than every day. You could not use the phone or purchase any groceries either when you were on that status. So in the course of my 16 years, I was beat up maybe 5 or 6 times, and beyond the physicality of that, I was also subjected to those sanctions. But I would say beyond that, it was very hard as a 17-year-old to adjust to just being in a cell. I mean, it was hard to be in the cell, and the cell walls were there, and the cell bars, and I had to fight off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. It was very difficult.
So when you were like in prison, like through the years, did you ever think that you would ever get out, or was you just like a lost hope, or did you try and like have that like high hopes of trying to getting out and trying to fight for your life, or was it just like denial after denial?
Well, it was denial after denial for sure, but I had hope throughout the overwhelming majority of my time. I mean, that's how I got through. I mean, I lost 7 appeals. That got me through 11 years. And when your appeals are exhausted, the only way back into court is if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence. And so because I didn't have any money to hire an attorney or an investigator, I began a letter writing campaign. I wrote letters for like 4 years. And at that point, my hope was based on those letters. Those letters became my legal work. Then at some, and I rarely got responses other than the occasional no. Then I went to the parole board where, because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, I mean, I was denied parole largely based on that. So by that point, I already had 15 years in. And so that's when my hope, began to start blinking, and I struggled with it. I almost had no help. But then it seemed like, so I placed an ad in the newspaper, the Sacramento Bee, and looking for a pen pal, and he seemed to have shown up right in the nick of time. I mean, the last 2 years. And, in the last year of my incarceration, what turned out to be my last year, after I had gotten turned down for parole, I mean, I was asking the stranger really that I really didn't know from anywhere, do you think I should just give up? Should I just, should I just commit suicide? I mean, did I just quit this effort? I mean, I'm never going to get out of here. So my hope flickered quite a bit at that time.
And I believe you mentioned in other interviews that the Janine Pirro was the DA during your appeals process and all that, and she refused
Correct.
to
Yes.
Yes.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I understand. I know what you're getting at. So Piero, as she often likes to say, when asked about my case, was not the DA when I was convicted. However, she did take office prior to the first appeal being decided. So it was her office that fought in 7 appeals, with her prosecutors arguing that, arguing against my innocence claims based on the DNA. I think one time one of the arguments they made was that a negative DNA test result is no insulation to a guilty verdict. I mean, that was one of the ridiculous arguments that they made against me. And it was her office that, when my lawyer was given the incorrect information from the court clerk, it was her office that urged the federal court to simply rule that I was late without making a decision on the merits of the issues I was arguing. And that was what the court did. And then there was her office that, defended that decision the next 3 courts. It was her office that blocked me from getting further DNA testing several times, because the DNA data bank had been created in 1997, 98. And it was her office, and I wanted further testing through it. And it was her office that, refused to give me the testing. So my rhetorical question to Janine Pirro, who does a lot of commentary on television now, is: so you're telling me that in all of that you don't bear any moral culpability? You didn't help keep the ball rolling against me? Nothing at all?
Like she could have helped shorten your your time in prison by years.
She was allowed. Yeah. She could have allowed me to get the further testing. I mean, I was asking for that in 1997. I asked for that then, and I asked again for it in 1998 in the federal court documents, and she refused. And when I later got the testing, because she left office, I was exonerated. And that was, from 97 to 2006, that's 9 years. I could have saved 9 years. That would have been huge.
That's crazy. So she had a major role in that too, which is
she did.
Crazy.
Why would she refuse? Like, what is the reasoning behind that? Just like it costs money and time, and it's like unlikely anything's going to come out of it. Like, what was the purpose of that?
Well, the written rationale that I got, it just said that the DNA issue was already in front of the jury, which convicted me, and in front of the appellate courts, which affirmed the conviction. I mean, that was what they wrote. I mean, what was that? Just subterfuge, or was that just what they wrote? But there was a lot more to it than that, thinking wise on their end. That I don't know.
Well, it seems like clearly she didn't know anything about your case, because I feel like if she knew the circumstances surrounding all of the police misconduct that happened, she would have been more, willing to maybe do the new testing. But that's crazy. So in 2006, the Innocence Project takes on your case. Can you talk about how they, how you got in touch with them, or how they knew about your case?
Sure. So one of the letters that I wrote, worked out. I wrote a book author in care of the publishing company, but someone at the publishing company sent the letter instead to Claudia Whitman, who's an investigator. And when she wrote me, and when I sent her the DNA test results, she was convinced of my innocence. She actually never saw a case before that where somebody was excluded by DNA and that they had been convicted anyway. So she suggested I write the Innocence Project, and then she lobbied them from outside the organization to take the case, and she got other respected legal entities to lobby them to take my case. And then also I got lucky that one of the intake workers, Maggie Taylor, when the attorneys didn't want to take the case, she represented the case. So in all, she represented it twice after originally presenting it, eventually getting them to agree to take the case. So that was really the first key to how I was exonerated, getting that representation. Second key was Piro left office. And the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank. So they took the crime scene DNA, which already did not match me, and they entered it into the data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator, whose DNA was only there because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed the second victim 3.5 years later, as I mentioned earlier in the interview.
So they work on your case, and then on September, right? September of 2006 is when you're officially exonerated and released.
Well, my conviction was overturned September 22nd, 2006. My official exoneration was November 2nd, 2006. That was when they, so what happened was that the district attorney wanted some confirmatory test to be run. And so exoneration, was the second step, was November 2nd, 2006, which they agreed to, by the way. They agreed to exonerate me on actual innocence grounds. And the perpetrator was actually arrested and convicted for the crime as well.
Wow. So can you tell us a little bit about what, like, that first day out after 16 years behind bars, like? I'm sure you probably remember it quite clearly, your very first day.
I do. Yeah. It was, yeah. And in some very real ways, that was like my birthday. Well, I mean, there was a press conference when I was released, and my first words there at the press conference were, is this really happening? It just felt kind of surreal, and everything I'd ever wanted to say, but could never get anybody to hear me say, just kind of came to my mind. And so I held him there for 2.5 hours to do an off-the-cuff presentation. From there, we went to, there was a luncheon that the Innocence Project had arranged for. And, my first meal, I had mussels with Fra Diavolo sauce, I had a side of angel hair. And we got, I had some Neapolitan ice cream. They only sold strawberry one way, or you could have a combo of vanilla and chocolate. So I told them, well, can you just put it all in one bowl for me? So I did that. And from there, I went to my aunt's house, who was in a neighboring county, because my mother had moved for like 3 hours away north. She was no longer in the same county. So we went to my aunt's house, and I would love to tell you we had an incredible party that lasted to the crack of dawn. But the truth of the matter is that by then, I had long since lost touch with anybody, and I really couldn't relate or talk to anybody else. I remember that we sat around this big table, and people that, there was a few family members there that had coffee, and there was another family member or two that came over that, has not been able to attend the court proceedings. And so they were sitting around the table talking, and I was just sitting there, unable to communicate, unable to relate, feeling out of place. And so at some point I just decided to do something that I hadn't done in a really long time, which was I just wanted to be able to sit outside in the dark. My uncle had a little bit of land there, and so I was able to sit outside in the dark. But in the prison, and you go to the yard, when it gets dark, they make you go inside. So I sat there and for a little while, and I took a bath that night. It was my first bath in like 16 years, and that was really the extent of the highlights. I mean, honestly, I just felt out of place, and I didn't feel like I belonged out there, and I couldn't share or express anything that I was, feeling, because the people had become strangers to me at that point, and the ones that had not, had, sporadically visited with me. And, whenever I would get a visit, I mean, not only would they be spread out quite a bit in terms of time, but the conversations were, generally speaking, the conversations were really about my being preoccupied with, what is the next thing I can do to try to get out of here? Did you call this one? Did you call that one? Did you look this up? Did you take this step? And that's all the conversation was about. It wasn't about any of the trauma I was experiencing while I was in prison, or the trauma of being wrongfully imprisoned, or people keeping me up to date on the whole world as it was evolving technologically, and what's the latest and greatest with, family members and friends that I knew. It wasn't about any of those things. So, the end result of all of that is it was really hard to communicate. And really, that's typical of people who've been wrongfully imprisoned. It's hard to relate or talk to, people that have not been incarcerated. It's hard to, because I know that nothing in their background would really enable them to understand what it was like to be arrested for something I didn't do, or, and to be exposed to the prejudicial pre-trial media coverage going into the trial, or losing a trial, or being imprisoned, or even all of these difficulties. I mean, it felt like, in reintegrating, it felt like I was in a parallel world where technology was different. GPS, cell phones, internet hadn't been created before, and culture was different, and neighborhoods looked different, and different people lived there. And cumulatively, it felt like I was in a parallel world that I didn't belong in. So that was very hard, just like the stigma of having been in prison. Wrongfully, yeah, but in prison for 16 years nonetheless. So how much of that rubbed off on me? Is it safe to be alone someplace with me? So it's hard to deal with that stigma. It's frankly kind of frustrating, because I'm just as innocent of the murder and rape of Angela Correa as any of you three are. The only difference is I had the misfortune of being arrested and wrongfully convicted of it, but I didn't do it. I was innocent, and it was proven. So I feel like in some ways it's unfair to be stuck with that stigma, but I am. I had to go to mental health professionals 4 times a week for 6 years, and dealing with the after effects of my experience. It's common for people to experience post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, anxiety, fear on seeing law enforcement, a feeling of processing things at a slower speed, a feeling of having been frozen in time. I was released when I was 32, and I felt like I was 17 years old, because that was the age that I was when I was last free. And then being released with nothing, and being always passed over for gainful employment. And, I was making money doing speaking engagements, but that's not a consistent form of income. I caught on as a weekly columnist, and I was making good money, maybe like $250, $300 for an article, but it was only a weekly paper. So they wanted one a week, and that was it. So it was very, I didn't have any other means open to me on how to earn additional money. So it was a struggle financially. It took 5 years for me to receive any financial compensation. So that was a big challenge as well. And it was quite lonely. It's, maybe that's part of what still I experience now, in terms of being able to fully establish a social life. I mean, it feels like most of the people out here already have their primary and secondary relationships already put together. So there's not much space for me to be anything other than somebody on the peripheral. The hobbies and things that I still, want to play basketball, or, throw a ball around, or go on the bumper cars, or, experience nightlife, or go on trips, or do a lot of energy-based things. And that's really not what I'm 47 now, and I still feel that. that's not what most people who am I to do that with? That's not what people my age are doing. They did that in their 20s. So who are my peers to do that with? So the lack of commonalities in hobbies and interests and things you like to do for fun. And I don't feel like most people in the society out here are really all that committed to living a balanced life. It feels like most people do their job, come home, eat something, watch an hour or two of TV, and go to sleep. But I know that adults can have fun. So at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I'm ready to go to recreation. There's no reason why you can't. And maybe around 10 or 11 or later, I'll go to sleep. But that's not how people are. That's not how people are thinking. So all of those things, prove to be challenges associated with trying to build a new social circle with really no human assets to start out with. I mean, it's not even really like an immigrant moving to another country that finds other immigrants of the same ethnicity or the same country, and they introduce them to everyone else in that community, and those people introduce them to other people, and suddenly they have a circle of people and that they can chat with and interact with and socialize with, and those people lead. Where's my first key person like that? Where's my community at to get me started in the same way? I mean, it doesn't exist.
My understanding is there's very little resources for that sort of thing out there. Like even, programs for like education for people who've been, in prison, or housing, or getting
Right.
jobs and stuff like that. So I know there was nothing in 2006 for you. Is there anything even remotely close now?
The short answer is no. I mean, it's recognized as a need, but there really aren't any organizations that really have like a comprehensive program to address all of that. There's plenty of nonprofit organizations that deal with prisoner reentry, but that's for people on parole or probation, not for exonerees. And there certainly isn't governmental help. I mean, I feel strongly like that housing, things like housing, medical care, mental health services, job training, job placement, classes on technology, access to public transportation. I feel strongly that should be provided immediately upon exoneration. But as of now, it's not. Even states that like New York that do have compensation, it's a lawsuit and it's a process, and it took me 5 years. I mean, it's now the average length of time is 2 or 3 years, so it's gotten speedier, but there's still nothing in place between the point of release until a compensation claim is resolved. So that's still largely unaddressed.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy to me that it's still so far behind in that, there has to obviously be something. You think by now, at this day and age, there should be, but obviously not. For you went on and I believe you took some of the money from your settlements to start the
Yes.
Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So when I was released, as I mentioned, I did the off-the-cuff presentation at the press conference. And at that point, I realized, well, I could be part of the Innocent Spoon without necessarily being an attorney. And so I embarked on an advocacy trail as an individual advocate for about 5 years. So I was speaking, I was writing, I was doing media appearances, I was meeting with elected officials. And I did that while in the middle of all those other struggles that I mentioned, at one point being a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter. But then Mercy College, which had extended a scholarship offer to me to finish the bachelor's degree because I had gotten the GED and associates, and I completed a year towards the bachelor's. At the time, the funding was cut. So it made it into one of the newspapers as a human interest item that I was 10 classes short of a bachelor's degree. And Mercy College they gave me a scholarship to finish the bachelor's. And I did go on to get a master's degree from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My thesis is on wrongful conviction cause and reform. And that was really how my advocacy work was limited, to those 4 ways. And I did nibble on the edges a little bit in terms of trying to free people. I was limited really to, like, I wrote about cases in my capacity as a columnist while the injustices were happening, because that's really when the coverage is needed. I mean, more so than after someone's been cleared. And I would show up in the courtroom for the visual effect on the judges. I was a recognizable figure to some extent. And, the theory was if a judge saw me there, and then he would pay a little bit more closer attention to that particular case. And I allowed my name to be utilized in press releases and media advisories, with the idea of my name being the hook for more media to come to inevitably cover a case that was being litigated. But once I was compensated after 5 years, I wanted to be more involved in freeing people, and so I did take $1.5 million from what I got, and I did start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And we have been able to get 11 people home that were wrongfully imprisoned, and we helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction: DNA database expansion, videotaping, interrogations, identification reform. I am an advisory board member of the coalition group It Could Happen to You, which the foundation is part of, and we helped pass an additional 5 laws, most of them in New York, independent oversight, independent for prosecutors, and discovery reform, and we helped pass a law in Pennsylvania. So currently the foundation is working on 10 cases, and we are doing policy work through that coalition in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. And at some point, it became not enough for me to sit in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table and represent some of the clients and make some of the arguments. Hence, going to law school and becoming an attorney, in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as an attorney. And I feel like I've gotten a lot of additional opportunities through having the additional credential, and I've entered 3 of the cases as co-counsel, and it certainly being an attorney has helped the policy work that I do as well. And I've been able to position justice reform as about accuracy and justice rather than anti-cop or anti-prosecutor. I mean, it's not a few bad apples. It's a hell of a lot more than that, or we wouldn't have all those cases documented by the National Registry of Exonerations. But at the same time, it's at the same time, there are a lot of good people in law enforcement as well, and I've been able to position it that way, and I've gotten some buy-in from some unusual circles. So, for example, I did serve on the Peekskill Police Task Force Reform Group. I was assigned to the policy subcommittee with the sitting police chief, a county police officer, and the retired detective, and we were able to get consensus on some changes to the police manual. I served on the transition team for the incoming Westchester District Attorney's Office, helping to draft memos on what procedures they should establish, and having a conviction review unit in the District Attorney's Office. I've been able to speak in front of judges and 4 or 5 different judicial groups addressing different wrongful conviction related topics. I've given a lot of presentations in front of defense attorneys. I mean, just where I'm not there telling my story, I'm substantively instructing on some new tactics that they should consider utilizing in defending actually innocent clients. I mean, considering that these conservative tactics really haven't been working when it comes to innocent people. And so I've been able to do those things and for the last 7.5 years, twice a year, I've been able to co-teach a police academy, the ethics class there. So I really, the law degree has really helped out helped out quite a bit.
Wow, that's like incredible that you're able to, that you're now, you are an attorney and you're helping it on the other side, from the experience that you had, and now you can kind of be on the other side and help other people who are in your situation.
It's like you came full circle.
It's
Portion
true.
of
It's
full
right.
circle.
Yeah, you're right. I
Yeah,
do.
But it's pretty cool,
Exactly
yeah.
right. Sure, I do feel
yeah,
like I've come full circle. Yes.
yeah. And did you ever like reconnect with anyone from your high school, or did you ever um speak with like Angela's family after you were released? About
Both.
both?
So first with Angela's family. So I did meet. So Angela's mother came to court at the sentencing of the actual perpetrator, as did I. And when everything was finished, we were in the hallway, and she sent the investigator that had been assigned to her over to speak to me to ask me if I was willing to speak with her. And of course I was. And so, we had a kind of a tearful embrace in the hallway, and we exchanged contact info. And about a month or so after that, I spent a couple of weekends at their house at their invitation. And it was really a kind of a powerful healing moment. They accept the idea of my innocence. I mean, the law enforcement told them I'm innocent. The actual perpetrator was arrested and convicted of the crime, but they still wanted to know, well, why did I falsely confess to it? And I was able to share that with them. And I did want to tell them myself, listen, I am innocent. I didn't do it. And so it's really kind of healing and powerful and cathartic. In terms of other people, a few years ago, maybe during my first year of law school, I was invited to attend my first high school reunion, with the class that I would have graduated with had my life not been interrupted. And, that was an amazing experience also. And I felt like at the culmination of that night that, I found a missing part of my life that night. And it was clear to me from that, just from the warm embrace that I was given and the meaningful conversations that happened, it just became clear to me that my being ripped away from, the school and people I knew, and, that was traumatic for them as well.
Wow. Wow, that's such an incredible story though, like that you're able to now, you're an attorney, you're helping people, and your foundation is like doing such great work too, helping other people. So it's really, really awesome.
I think it's remarkable that, when you got out, and maybe you were like, you could have been angry with the world and just kind of had that energy in a negative way, but instead you've kind of turned it around to make a difference, like a real difference in the world. So I think that's like amazing how you're able to kind of step out of that and, put that positive energy out there. So that's remarkable.
So in the first week that I was home, I did feel angry or bitter that first week. But so I remember shortly before I was exonerated, somebody else was, and I saw that on the press conference on television while I was still in prison. And he was saying that he was not angry. And, I thought that was just like the silliest thing ever. And I made a mental note that I am not going to do what he did if I get my moment. But after the first week of being angry or bitter, I felt like it was destroying me. And I remembered back to what I had saw him say. And I realized that I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. And I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter, that I've lost so much already. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? And that if I was angry or bitter, it's not like I would be adversely impacting anybody. I would really be the only loser in that scenario. And for all those reasons, I decided, not to be angry or bitter. And the vehicle that allowed me to actualize that is I take that energy that I feel and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. I do make sense of everything that happened to me in a kaleidoscopic type of way. My purpose in the world is to free wrongfully convicted people and to prevent what happened to me to happen to other people, and the fight for broader justice reform. And that's my place in the world, and that's how I make sense of what happened to me. And within that, I find that my suffering counts for something. It's healing, it's cathartic, it's meaningful, and it makes a difference. And I feel like I have some inner peace with that.
That's awesome. So I think that's pretty much it. Steph, Kate, either of you have any other questions or comments? Or
I just want to say thank you so much. It was such an interesting conversation with you. So thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I'm just like in awe of how this whole story came about, and it's just your attitude towards the whole thing. It's just incredible.
So just a couple of quick points I just want to make just for ending everything. If people are interested in hearing more about my story, if they like the conversation today that we just had, there is a documentary short out about me on Amazon Prime called Conviction. So they can watch it there. In terms of people want to keep up with the advocacy work that I do, there is the website www.deskovic.org, Deskovic. I do have a public figure page on Facebook. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, and so I can be messaged in that way. I really see wrongful conviction as a worldwide problem, not simply a American problem. And so my ultimate dream is to have a chapter of the foundation in each state and ultimately in each country. And countries that we do not hear as much or anything about wrongful conviction, it's not because the injustices aren't happening. It's because few to no people are being exonerated, few to no people are doing this work. The best movie, the best actual movie on wrongful conviction based on real life events, the setting is actually the UK, and the name of the movie was called In the Name of the Father, which was kind of a double entendre, a play on words there. And I'll just say this about it, that this dogged defense attorney who's trying to exonerate. So the father has passed away. He's been wrongfully imprisoned with the son and with a bunch of other people. The father passes away, and so this lawyer who did not give up on the case, he goes to a records office and asks for the file because she's still desperately trying to find some new angle. And the clerk gives her the wrong file. They give her the file that belongs to the father's case, and the father and the son have the same name. And there was per the movie, there was a document in that file which had information pertaining to the innocence, and it was marked "Do not show to the defense." Hence the name In the Name of the Father. So it was kind of a dramatic and touching movie, and kind of affected me just now, just thinking about it. But that's something to think about. We do have a crowdfunding page on the Patreon website, which is for people that are willing to be recurring monthly donors. And, what if 25,000 people, what if 100,000 people, in order to help free wrongfully convicted people, what if they were willing to sacrifice $3 or $5 a month on a recurring basis? I mean, that would enable us to work on more wrongful conviction cases and to pursue, policy changes in more than just the 3 states that we are pursuing things on. And when we get enough public support, that's how we would be able to expand, and open chapters into other states and ultimately in other countries. But I definitely need people that are drawn to the cause, that are willing to help in, any number of ways. And if you are an attorney out there, think about taking one wrongful conviction case on pro bono in the course of your lifetime. And if I was to just leave a actionable item for people listening, something that they can apply directly to themselves, I think, and I think that not just by wrongful imprisonment, but even the 5 years of difficulty afterwards, and the struggle to get into law school, and the hardship it was to graduate law school and the hell that it was to prep for the bar exam and pass. So I think based on all of those things, I've drawn some lessons which can be I've extrapolated and can be summed up this way: have a goal, and have a realistic plan. So you should be able to look at the plan 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, "Yeah, I could see how this would work." And if you think about it, it makes sense, because who wants to carry out a plan that you don't think has a chance to be successful? Be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan is not the goal. So if an unexpected door or opportunity opens for you that is not part of your plan but moves you towards that goal, then you need to walk through it, take advantage of opportunity, and keep moving towards your goal. No excuses. So there might be reasons why something is daunting, why it's a challenge, why it's more difficult, but no actual reasons why it can't be done. You just have to want it enough. And that brings me to my next point, which is, don't be afraid of hard work. It's probably not going to just drop into your lap. I believe you have to work really hard to use a sports metaphor. You leave it all out on the field. And if you do that, then if you put yourself in position for a miracle to happen, that's when usually something happens, or a door opens for you, you catch a break, or the right person comes along. And lastly, just never give up. And when you can't go on anymore, like I reached that juncture several times along with what I just mentioned, remember that that could be the key moment right there. You might be on the verge of the breakthrough, but because you quit, it won't happen. So even though you can't go on anymore, you have to do so anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. And I've told myself that quite a few times, and that's enabled me to keep going and eventually get to the point where things are now. And once you survive, once you overcome, you have to reach back and try to help other people into the same position, do some work on the preventative side. And from 50,000 feet away, I've seen people in other walks of life that have applied that. And I've seen people that used to be incarcerated and now they're working with at-risk youth, diverting them from there, and people that at one time were homeless and now they're working with homeless population, and people that have been sexually trafficked or sexually abused that now do work towards that goal, and people that have survived domestic abuse that are now working with women that are being domestically abused, or somebody that might have suffered some sort of debilitating illness or affliction that was not curable, or somebody that's faced discrimination or sexism or racism. So, and anything else. These are all extreme things that happen. But, there's other things that are not as extreme as that, but still difficulties in general. So we need people to apply that formula and, help people in the same position and do some work on the preventative side. And I do think that makes everything, it could be a way of try to improve the world some. And, maybe that sounds corny to say that, but that's kind of my vibe. That's my wavelength. And I live that way. And, I love seeing other people do that. And it would make my heart feel good to hear one day through some random email or social media or whatever that somebody heard me say this on this podcast and they decided to apply that. And now they're, not only to give them encouragement to keep going and whatever the challenge was, but now they're doing some meaningful work. And, that would really make me feel good to hear something like that.
Yeah,
what I have to say for today.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you and hearing your perspective. And yeah, it was really, really interesting. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, sharing your platform and, the research and work that it took to do the interview. And by all means, share the link when it comes out, and I will do my part to promote the episode on all of my social media and encourage people to follow your show as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you.
So once again, thank you so much to Jeff for taking some time out of his very busy schedule and coming to chat with us on the show. We very, very much appreciate it, and we hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Jeff. So as he said a little bit towards the end of the interview, you can find him on Instagram at Jeffrey Deskovic. He also has a public Facebook page, so you can find him on Facebook. And if you would like some more information about his foundation that he was able to start after his exoneration, you can find more information at deskovicfoundation.org. We're going to link that in the show notes. And also, you did hear him mention about his Patreon page. So if this story spoke to you and you're really passionate about wrongful conviction cases, then definitely check out the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice on Patreon and become a monthly patron. You know, for as little as $1.50 per month, you can join the fight for wrongful conviction cases and help Jeff and his foundation exonerate more innocent people. As always, you can find us on all the social medias, Instagram at Crime Family Podcast, Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1, and on Facebook at Crime Family Podcast. We also have a Gmail account, so you can email us any of your feedback, comments, or case suggestions at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. We thank you so much for tuning into part 2, and there's still more coming up. We're also releasing part 3 today as well, and in the next part, we're going to be interviewing Gia Wirtz, and she is an award-winning documentary filmmaker who made a short film about Jeffrey's case. So you heard Jeff mention a little bit about the short film towards the end of the interview there, and if you are in the US, you can find that short documentary on Amazon Prime. It's called Conviction. Check it out because it's very, very, very eye-opening and interesting. So we're going to be talking with the filmmaker of that documentary, Gia Wirtz, in our next episode. So we really hope you'll tune into part 3 and hear what she has to say, because it's going to be a really great interview as well. So thank you for listening, and take care.